Hi, and welcome to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in this video, we're going to learn the 2 to 4 player game, Skyrise, designed by Gavin Brown, Sebastian Pochon, Adam Wise, and published by Roxley, who helped sponsor this video. Constructing buildings on land is a thing of the past. Now it's time to craft structures among the clouds, which you'll be doing here as you try to prove yourself the greatest artisan of your time. So, join me at the table, and let's learn how to play. To set up, put the game board in the center of the play area and collect this center island to place in the middle, along with as many of these outer islands as the number of players. We'll assume we have 3 players, randomly discarding 1. Any you've kept are randomly arranged around the central island, attaching them together like this. When you have fewer than 4 players, you'll have an open area, and where the open areas are located doesn't matter. The game comes with a variety of small circular discs known as Commission, Wild, Patron, and 4 different colored types of neighborhood discs. If you have 4 players, you'll use all of these. But if you have 3 players, remove 1 Commission and Wild disc and 3 of each color of neighborhood disc. With a 2-player game, instead remove 2 of each letter from the Patron discs and 5 of each color from each neighborhood. You'll find a reminder of this in the rulebook and on this included setup aid card, so we'd refer to this row in our 3-player game. The discs you kept are put into the included bag and given a good mix. The islands of the board are divided into neighborhoods distinguished by their various colors. You now randomly draw and place 1 disc on each neighborhood. Again, this should be done randomly, so you might want to decide on a pattern you're going to follow first, maybe going from left to right, top to bottom, so it looks something like this when you're done. Your bag will be empty and can now be returned to the box. The cards with this back are known as Wonders, which you'll shuffle, dealing 3 to each player, unless you have a 2-player game, in which case each player is dealt 5. Either way, any undealt cards you return to the box unseen. Then find the secret objectives, which have this back, shuffle, and then deal 1 face down to each player, returning any leftovers unseen back to the box. You can always look at your own Wonder and secret objective cards, but keep them a secret from the other players. The cards with this back are the Panoramas, which you shuffle, dealing 2 face up beside the board, returning the rest back to the box. Then set what is known as the Island Control card nearby, along with this large Key to the City token, and if you have 3 or 4 players, also set out this small Key to the City. These are known as the Patron Value tiles, which you'll shuffle with their question mark sides face up, putting 1 randomly onto each of these spaces at the top of the board. Now each person collects a player board, scoring disc, 12 wooden buildings, and 1 wonder in their chosen color. The player boards are double-sided and have unique art, but otherwise all work the same way. Now have each player move their scoring disc to the 0 space of what is known as the Prestige track, which runs around the outside edge of the board. If you examine your buildings, you'll find that each has a number on one end, and some of these numbers include a dot. Place your Wonder and all of your buildings with a dot on the left side of your board. You won't have access to these at the start of the game, so lay them down as a reminder of that. All the rest of your buildings you set on the right side of your board, number side up, arranged from lowest to highest value so everyone can easily see them. Keep in mind, the values on every player's buildings are unique. The numbers on my buildings aren't on any of the other players. I should mention, in a 2-player game, each person also collects the scoring disc and wonder piece from one of the unused colors, meaning they'll have 2 each. They still put their main color's scoring disc on the Prestige track, but they keep the other for use later, as we'll see. And that's the setup. In Skyrise, you and the other players will be engaging in auctions which can give you the right to place your buildings on the board and claim the tokens in the related spaces. The tokens will help you score points at the end of the game, and so will the cards in your hand and the wonders that you construct. Have the most points by the end of the game, and you win. Before getting into the main rules of the game, I need to explain a few important concepts. As I mentioned earlier, the board is divided into different colored spaces known as neighborhoods. Over the course of the game, you'll be adding your building pieces to these spaces. When a building's number side is face up, it's known as a bid. When its number side is face down, it's considered a constructed building. A wonder isn't considered a building, but both are referred to in the game as structures. A neighborhood can have at most either one structure or one bid. When it doesn't have either, it's known as an unoccupied neighborhood, but when it has a bid or a structure, it's said to be occupied. One other concept to be aware of is adjacency. A neighborhood is considered adjacent to another neighborhood as long as they share some part of their border, but not just a corner. These printed blimps on the board can also prevent neighborhoods from being adjacent. For example, these two neighborhoods aren't adjacent because no part of their borders touch at an edge. This blimp prevents them from touching at all. Even though there are blimps between these two neighborhoods, parts of their border do touch along their edges, so these are adjacent. On the board, you'll also find these bridges, and neighborhoods connected by bridges are also considered to be adjacent. Okay, with that understood, let's move on. The game is played over 2 eras, starting with Era 1. Here, a number of auctions will be performed one after the other. During an auction, players take turns making bids. At the beginning of the game, you pick someone randomly to start. I'll be this player here, and we'll say that I was randomly picked, so I must make the first bid. Your available bids are the buildings to the right of your player board, which have their numbers showing on the top. All the buildings here must be arranged from the lowest to the highest value so other players can easily see and assess the values of the bids you have remaining. Since I'm making the first bid, I can pick any of these, and let's say I choose 33. When placing the first bid at the start of Era 1, it must go into an unoccupied neighborhood, meaning one without a bid or structure already on it, that's located on the central island. I'll place mine here. Now, why you might pick certain spaces will make more sense later, but we'll assume I made this choice. After the first player makes their bid, the bidding continues with players taking turns going clockwise around and around the table, with each player deciding to either outbid the previous player or pass. Let's assume the next player decides to outbid. They must use one of their bids with a higher value than the last bid placed on the board. I placed a 33, so they could use this 54 or go right to an even higher number. Maybe they decide on 63 instead. A new bid must always be put into a neighborhood space adjacent to the last bid placed. So maybe they decide to go here, remembering that spaces connected by a bridge are also considered adjacent. Now, the next player can choose to outbid or pass. Let's assume players continue bidding, creating a path like this. Instead of outbidding on your turn, you can choose to pass. Now, once you pass, you can't bid anymore during the current auction, while the remaining players will continue outbidding or passing. Just keep in mind, you can never outbid yourself if you're the player with the current highest bid on the board. Once everyone has passed, the player with the highest bid on the board wins and flips their bid face down, turning it into what is known as a constructed building. All of the unsuccessful face-up bids are then returned to their owners. Remember, when taking back your bids, return them to their ascending numerical order. The player who won the auction and constructed their building now collects the disc in that neighborhood. There are a variety of different discs, so let's take a moment and see how each are resolved when you collect them. Each of these are known as neighborhood discs, which come in 4 different colors. Anytime you gain a neighborhood disc, add it to the leftmost empty space of its matching colored track on your board here. The tokens in these spaces will affect your final score, as we'll learn about later. But be aware, if you ever have a track that's full and you gain another disc of that type, you instead add it to what is known as the visionary area here, where it will be worth points later, as we'll see. This is known as a wild disc, which can count as any type of neighborhood. When you collect one, you must immediately decide which type of neighborhood it represents and add it to that track, or place it into this area if you choose a track that's full. Either way, once you've made your decision, you can't change it later in the game. These are another type of disc known as patrons, which have letters matching what are known as the art patrons here at the top of the board. When you gain a Patron Disc, add it to this visionary area of your board, and you may then secretly examine the underside of the matching letter token at the top of the board. The value here is how many prestige points each of your matching letter Patron Discs will be worth at the end of the game. After examining a Patron token, then put it back face down. The tokens at the top of the board will show a value of 3, 4, 5, or 8. And as long as you have the matching letter disc on your player board, you can examine the related token to remind yourself of its value at any time. Just make sure you don't reveal this value to any of the other players, because knowing which ones are the most valuable will influence which discs players want to collect. Finally, we have commission discs. When you collect one of these, add it to the visionary area of your board. It may help you earn points at the end of the game, as we'll see. So those are all of the different types of discs you can collect when you win an auction and construct a building. When an auction ends, the player who won it always starts the next auction just as before by picking and placing a bid. Remember, when you start an auction, you can place the first bid in any empty space of the central island. But from the second auction onward, you may instead place the first bid adjacent to any space with an already constructed structure belonging to any player. So I could place my first bid into any of these spaces, or instead into any of the spaces adjacent to this building. Then again, in clockwise order, players take turns either outbidding the last bid or passing. Normally an auction ends once everyone except one player has passed. But it might also end if there's nowhere else to place a bid. For example, let's say the next player to add a bid in this current auction went here, and then the next player outbid them by going into this neighborhood space. From here, there's no other unoccupied space adjacent to this neighborhood. So the auction must end, and this player wins, constructing their building and gaining the token, while the other players take back their bids. And those are the rules for auctions, which you'll find a reminder of here on the included player aid. Auctions will continue, one after the other, with the winner of each auction starting the next one, until a player has constructed all the face-up buildings they have in front of them, which again are any without a dot by their number. Once a player has none of these buildings left, the first era ends, and you resolve the 4 steps shown here. First, you score this island control card we set by the board during setup. To do this, check each island on the board, including the central small one, and the player who constructed the most tall buildings there earns 5 prestige points, which is represented by this symbol. And just so it's clear, this is a tall building, this is medium, and this is small. So if we start here in the central island, the green player has more tall buildings than any other player there, so they earn 5 prestige. Anytime a player earns prestige points, you advance their marker that many spaces along this track. If a player ever earns more prestige than the number of spaces on the track, which comes to 99, just record those 99 points they've earned so far and continue again from the start of the track. If we were to score this island next, you'll notice there's a tie for players with the most tall buildings. In that case, those players compare who has the most medium buildings. 2 in this case compared to yellow with 1, 2, 3. Whoever has the most medium buildings in that case would win and score the 5 points. If there was a tie for medium buildings, then those players would check to see who has the most small buildings on that island, and if there was still a tie, the tied players would each earn 5 points for that island. If an island has no tall buildings, that's still considered a tie. The players are all tied for having 0 tall buildings, and then they would check to see who has the most medium buildings and so on. With island control scoring complete, you now score the Panorama cards that were put beside the board during setup. This one says that each player scores 3 prestige for each island where they have 3 or more adjacent structures. So the yellow player with structures arranged like this scores 3 points. Now keep in mind, these 4 green structures are adjacent, but there aren't 3 of them within the same island as the Panorama card requires, so this green player wouldn't score any points for that card with these buildings. If we look at the scoring rule on blimps, it says that you earn 3 prestige points for each blimp on the board with 3 or more of your structures bordering it. Blimps are printed all over the board, so just check each one. Here, this player has 1, 2, 3 structures bordering this blimp, so they'd earn 3 points. And the same structures can count towards other blimps as well, meaning these two help the player earn another 3 points for having 3 or more structures around this blimp. We won't go over all the possible panorama cards in this video, as how they work is explained on them, but if you have any questions, you can refer to the reference on the back of the rulebook while playing. That said, after scoring the panorama cards, the next step at the end of the first era is to choose wonder cards. Each player was dealt 3 of these at the start of the game. You now pick one of yours to keep, setting it face down in front of you and discarding the other 2, unseen by the other players, back to the box. Once everyone is ready, they reveal their chosen wonder card, which will be used later. And we'll see why you might pick one wonder card over another later as well. But in short, it provides your wonder piece with a special bonus when it's constructed in Era 2, as we'll see. In a 2-player game, this step is resolved a little differently. During setup in a 2-player game, each person is dealt 5 wonder cards, and they collect the wonder and scoring disc of a player color not being used. At the end of the first era, they'll pick 2 wonder cards to keep, and once revealed, they assign 1 to each of their wonders. Indicate which one belongs to this wonder by setting the matching colored scoring token on it, meaning this card goes with a wonder from my normal player color. Either way, after choosing wonders, players now unlock their Era 2 structures, which are the ones with a dot by their number. They also collect their wonder piece, or 2 wonders in a 2-player game, as we saw. Again, arrange these in numerical order, along with any other buildings you might have still had from the first era. Where you place your wonder within the order doesn't matter. Then the second era begins and is played just like the first, where you'll use the buildings and wonder you have remaining for the rest of your bids. The first auction of the second era is begun by the player whose chosen wonder card has the lowest number at the top here, known as the initiative value. So this player in this case. During auctions in the second era, players can now use their wonder as their bid. These don't have a value because when used, a player's wonder always wins them the auction. Not only that, they also immediately resolve their chosen wonder card when their wonder piece is placed on the board. In this case, in addition to gaining the disc on the space where I won the auction, my wonder effect here says I gain an additional disc adjacent to this wonder's space, if any. Now this means a player winning an auction with a building on this space in the future won't have a token to collect from here. We won't go over all the wonder cards in this video, as how they work is printed on them, but you can refer to this reference on the back of the rulebook if you have questions about them while playing. Now remember, wonders always win the auction that they're placed in, but you can't start an auction with your wonder unless that's the only piece you have left. Speaking of which, as we mentioned, the second era is played just like the first, with players performing auctions one after the other. But eventually, a player will construct their final structure, meaning all of their buildings and wonders are now permanently on the board and they have no bids left to make. The first player to do this gains this large key to the city from beside the board and adds it to their visionary area. Anytime a player is unable to participate in auctions because they've run out of pieces to bid with, the remaining player with the lowest initiative value on their wonder begins the next auction. In a game with 3 or 4 players, this small key token will be by the board and is collected by the second player to construct all of their structures. Otherwise, auctions continue until all players have constructed all of their structures, which could result in a single leftover player just adding their remaining structures one after the other, with each one winning its own auction. This brings us to the end of the second era, where we will follow these steps to determine the final scores. To begin, score the island control card again, just as during the first era, but keep in mind, wonders aren't considered buildings and don't have a particular height, so you'll ignore them when scoring this card. Then you score both of the panorama cards again, which wonders can contribute to if the card refers to wonders or structures. Next, each player reveals the private objective they were dealt during the setup. Each of these will score you 10 points if you have 4 or more structures built on neighborhoods of a particular color, in this case, yellow ones. Remember, although wonders are not considered to be buildings, they are considered a structure, so they apply to effects that refer to structures like this does. Next, flip the patron tokens at the top of the board face up, and each player now scores prestige equal to these values for each related patron disc they have on their player board. So I'd score 3 points for my A token, and these Ds would be worth 8 points each. Also, for every neighborhood disc you had to place on the visionary area of your board, because you ran out of room on its track, you'll score 10 points. If you have the large key to the city, score the 10 points showing on it now. And if you have the small key, score its 4 points instead. If you have this commission disc, it scores you 1 prestige for each token you have in this visionary area of your board, including itself and any key or other commission token you might have collected. So in this case, it will earn me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more points. Next, you examine the tokens you placed on your neighborhood tracks, starting with yellow. The value showing above the rightmost token is how much each of your structures constructed in yellow neighborhoods is worth. In this case, 6 points each. You now remove all of your structures, both buildings and wonders, from the yellow neighborhoods they're located in, earning, in this case, 6 points for each. You then do the same for your structures in the green neighborhoods, which in this case would earn you 4 points each. Then you score white and brown. If you have no tokens for a particular color, you score the 2 points above this pre-printed token on its track here. Also notice that having tokens up to this position scores you 6 points for each related neighborhood, but having tokens up to here actually drops their score back down to 4 points each. Something to consider when you're determining how many tokens you want to collect. Once all the players have scored all their buildings and neighborhoods, the player with the most prestige points wins. In the case of a tie, the tied player, who constructed their last structure first, is the winner. Otherwise, that's everything you need to know to play Skyrise. If you have any questions about anything you saw here, feel free to put them in the comments below and I'll gladly answer them as soon as I get a chance. You'll also find forums for discussion, pictures, other videos, and lots more over on the games page at Board Game Geek, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. And if you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like, subscribing, and clicking that little bell icon so you get notification anytime we post a new video. And if you'd like to support us directly, you can join our Patreon team, which I'll have linked below. But until next time, thanks for watching.